Just give you a brief summary of of the format of tonight's meeting. The candidates will make introductory statements in the order in which their names appear on the ballot, and you have that in front of you. The introductory statements will be 3 minutes. Then we will open the floor to your questions. You can either raise your hand or you can write your question on an index card, and volunteers will collect the cards and bring them to me. So let's get started without further delay.
Can everybody hear okay? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Scholte, you're up first.
I thought it was going to be in alphabetical order. And I just looked at the ballot and realized my name was first. Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for bringing us together for this discussion. I'm just going to briefly tell you a couple of quick things about myself. I have never run for public office. I'm not a politician. I've been running a nonprofit foundation that does programs on Capitol Hill on defense, national security, and foreign affairs issues. In part of that work, I began getting involved in promoting freedom, democracy, and human rights abroad. And through that work, I've always worked in a nonpartisan fashion. The programs that we've had on Capitol Hill have been attended by Republicans and Democrats. I think it's really important that our country and our politicians work together across party lines to do things. And I think I think we've become too partisan and we're not working together enough to face a lot of the really serious problems our country's facing. In my work promoting freedom, democracy, and human rights abroad, I've been especially working with two people groups, the two of the most persecuted people in the world, according to whether it's Amnesty International or Freedom House, the people of North Korea and the people of Western Sahara. And through that work of helping rescue refugees that are escaping from North Korea, I've rescued hundreds of people that were trying to escape the tyranny of North Korea, including many women that were victims of trafficking in China. And I've also helped refugees in Africa that are trying to become a democracy. And through that work, I was awarded the Seoul Peace Prize, the Walter Judd Freedom Award, the Sungate Diplomatic Service Medal from the Korean government, and other awards. But the reason why I decided to run for Congress is during the swearing-in ceremony for a young lady whose family I rescued out of China who had escaped from North Korea, the judge said, as he was preparing to swear in hundreds of new American citizens, he said, "We're not required to do this anymore, but I'm going to take the liberty of telling you all, as you become American citizens, what makes America exceptional." And he talked about, number one, a constitution and a rule of law, that we are a country that has a written constitution, that we are a country that respects freedom of speech, freedom of the press, that we are a country with a free enterprise system, that we are a country that is a nation of immigrants that come here legally to become American citizens, and that we are a melting pot of many nations, but we are one country together, one nation together. And as he was talking about all these things, I realized that a lot of these things are being torn apart by our current politicians. And that's what led me to believe that I should run for office, as somebody who brings people together, who believes that America is exceptional, and that working together we can accomplish great things. And we're facing some very serious dangers now as Americans, and we need people that can work across party lines to do things to help people. So I thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Galdo.
I want to thank all of you for coming, and also a big thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this and other candidate meet and greets that will follow. I spent most of my career in government service, first in the Department of Defense and later at the U.S. Department of Energy. And in between DOD and DOE, I worked in the private sector for about 5 years. My experience in the Department of Defense, evaluating threats and assessing military systems capabilities and vulnerabilities, is useful not only in asking the right questions regarding decisions on R&D investment and military systems development and acquisition, but also in vetting rationales for military responses to security risks around the world. At the Department of Energy, my achievements included helping establish green power programs at utilities across the country. I also led the development of regulatory reforms and technical standards that are now incorporated in state net metering laws across the country, including here in Virginia. These were key to the growth of renewable energy we've seen in the past decade and the creation of green jobs. My experience in developing strategies to address global warming and developing technology roadmaps will aid in developing better policies to achieve our energy and environmental goals. What I hope to accomplish as your next congressman, if I'm elected, is to begin to transform government policy away from a focus on money to a focus on people. Public policy should be evaluated based on its impact on the quality of life of the average American, not on corporate profits or increasing the wealth of a few. This means not only addressing rising income inequality, but also inequality in our justice system. It means a focus on health and public safety, public transportation, air and water quality, education, and the affordability of the basic needs of life. It means reversing the increasing violation of privacy, due process, and the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It also means honesty and transparency in government. I do not have the time to address differences between myself and the other candidates, but I'm running to give voters a choice. If you are happy with the status quo, public policy driven by money, pick your choice, Republican or Democrat. If you want change, I will promise that I will be there to get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Galdo. Mr. Harrold.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all coming out tonight. I have had the opportunity to meet Ms. Scholte before. I just met Mr. Galdo. I appreciate them for coming and for having the opportunity to speak, but most of all, I thank you for coming here tonight to hear some of the ideas of what I would do as your next congressman if I have the honor to serve. My background, I currently run a solo practice as an immigration lawyer. What I mostly do day in and day out is go into immigration court and fight against deportation for individuals who have been placed in immigration proceedings. Before that, I was on the other side of that coin. I worked for the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 5 years as a prosecutor, and before that, a policy advisor on some of ICE's major initiatives. Before that, I taught law at the University of Mississippi, mostly in the Fourth Amendment, which is the search and seizure area. And before that, I was a police officer. I am going to talk tonight, I think the questions will go there towards the war on drugs, use of police militarization, some of the other aspects of the drug war. I've been in that drug war early on, back in the 90s as a City of Atlanta police officer, and I can see where that went wrong. And I can see where policing has moved from a protect and serve model to much more of an enforcement SWAT model. And I think that's dangerous, not because we don't need police. There's nothing better than a good police officer, and there's nothing worse than a bored police officer. But if someone asks me what my major priority is, I see this as a shift in time. I do believe there's a libertarian moment, to whatever degree. I believe that people are suspect of government. And I believe that a lot of what we've been talking about as a party for years, and I think this is being embraced by the other parties, logically, because it's important. What we used to talk about seemed kind of kooky. But now what we talk about seems less kooky because we've seen the fact that technology hasn't made the government more transparent to us, it's made us more transparent to the government. We need to stop using our military as an international police force and our police as a domestic military. Taxes should be simpler. Now, if you ask me, just in an ideological way, what would I do? I would get rid of the income tax. I would go to a flatter, fairer tax, because I believe that the way we do taxes, and probably agree, especially for a small business owner like me, you don't really pay your taxes. They take your money, then if you identify the deduction, and if you've done something that the government approves of, that's what deductions are. They favor certain things and they give you more of your money back. Then at the end of the year, you get your money back, and that's a tax-free loan. Now, my view on taxes may be very hard to achieve, actually getting rid of the income tax. But the intermediate steps have to do with the fact that the goal I would have is that Americans should be able to do their own taxes if they choose to. Taxes are way too confusing. I think we can all agree on simplification of taxes. I know I don't have much time left. My campaign is really about liberty, simplicity, and transparency. And I do see these as ideas across the board in many parties and many candidates. So I look forward to the questions. Thank you for having me here tonight. I actually just found out that I'm last on the ballot tonight where I'm sitting. But thank you for having me here, and thank you to my fellow candidates for having the opportunity to have this exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, Delegate Mark Keam will make the introductory statement for Gerry Connolly, who could not be here tonight.
Thank you. I need a timer here, so I'm going to put my 3 minutes up here. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Obviously, I'm not Congressman Gerry Connolly, but I'm here in his place as a surrogate because Congressman is unfortunately working at Capitol Hill. Many of you know that the President will be giving a major speech in about an hour and a half, and so obviously Congress is still in session. So unfortunately, he couldn't be here, so he sends his regrets, but he also sends his regards, and he looks forward to seeing you at the next one. I think there are about 3 or 4 other opportunities, and there might be some debates and such. So if you haven't met Gerry Connolly yet already, you'll have a chance to meet him and hear from him directly as well. And I also apologize that I can't answer the questions. Those are the rules here. So Congressman Connolly's position won't be able to be answered by me. But his campaign manager is here today. James Walkinshaw is in the back there. So if you have any specific questions about the Congressman's record or any specific questions, feel free to talk to James afterwards. I'm here to just tell you a couple things. First, I'd love for you to support Congressman Gerry Connolly, send him back to Congress this year for another term. And one of my colleagues here just mentioned that we're in a moment in time where there's a lack of trust in government and there's a sense of concern about what's happening, and I think that's absolutely true. But what that also means is that this is a time for people to go to government and go to work for us in a way that means the most for what we need to get out of government, which is infrastructure, bread and butter issues, taking care of the business of the people, and not waging partisan fights or ideological combats and getting on TV and screaming and yelling. That's what turns a lot of people off. And what you'll find with Gerry Connolly is for 20 years he has a track record working at the local level, at the county level, at the congressional level now, to work on those issues that matter the most, improving your quality of life. Take this building, for example. This is a library. This library would not have been possible if it wasn't for the chairman, Gerry Connolly, who pushed through a bond referendum working with the city of Fairfax to build this. Just a few miles from here is the Gerry Connolly 40-mile cross-county trail, which was created through a partnership with the local and county folks as well as federal funding. Those are quality of life issues that we care about in Fairfax County, and those are the types of issues that Gerry Connolly has worked on for 20 years, both as a member of Providence as well as the county and now in Congress. But in Congress, he's also been able to roll up his sleeves and work together in a bipartisan way with Republicans. Obviously, there are times when you have flashpoints and partisan issues come up, and we have to fight those ideological battles. But more often than not, Congressman Connolly, you'll find working with his Republican colleagues to get things done. For example, on the Government Oversight Committee, he's a subcommittee ranking member, and he's worked with the chairman, Darrell Issa, on improving our IT infrastructure, which saves us billions of dollars every year. He also worked on the Foreign Affairs Committee with the chairman, Ed Royce, who I happen to know pretty well because I've done some work with him on Korean issues. And Gerry Connolly was managing the bill on the floor that passed unanimously, which is miraculous in this day and age, North Korean human rights sanctions, but he also added to that family reunification issue as a part of the bargain. So Congressman Connolly's been out there working every single day for your interests in Northern Virginia and Fairfax County, and those are the types of people that we need, especially now that we're going to lose 8th and 10th District. We need Congressman Connolly to be there as our senior member. So I ask for your vote on November 4th. Thank you. That was my own time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we open the floor to your questions. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
To Ms. Scholte, why are you a Republican, and what will you do to forward the Republican agenda in the Congress?
Two minutes, yeah. I believe in freedom, and I believe in individual liberty. I believe that there's a proper role for government as well. I like to see it as limited as possible. What I would do, I will tell you the things I'm most concerned about is, and this is based on going door to door and visiting folks, number one, the healthcare issue. This is an example of what happens when you don't work together. All the major reforms we've done, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's Social Security, have always been done in a bipartisan fashion, working across party lines. We didn't do that with the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act had bipartisan opposition. Democrats and Republicans opposed it. Only Democrats supported it. And we see the disaster it has become. People are really suffering under this legislation. Everywhere I go, I'm talking to business owners that are struggling to try to figure out a way they can keep the insurance they have for their employees. I'm talking to folks who signed up for Obamacare that can't find a doctor. So the number one priority for me would be to fix the problems that this has caused our healthcare system. Second thing is the strangulation with regulations. Do you know there's more businesses closing than opening in America for the first time since the Depression?
this is terrible. It's because they're being strangled by high taxes and regulation. I think we need to reduce our taxes on our business. And small businesses is the first rung of success for many people when they're trying to pursue the American dream. A lot of our immigrant population that lives in the 11th District, this is a real melting pot area, one of the most diverse areas in the whole country. And these are folks I'm talking to all the time. They're really getting hurt by high taxes and regulations. So those are two issues. The third thing is the sequester, which is something that Congressman Connolly voted for. The sequester was a meat-axe approach because we couldn't come up with solutions to go about reforming and changing and cutting spending. And we ended up doing a sequester that was very harmful for our defense.
Thank you very much. Would either of you like to weigh in on that question and say why you're running as the party you're running?
I'm running because my wife suggested that I run in 2012. That was my first time in politics. I was sitting at home as a federal retiree complaining about everything that was going on in Washington, and she said, don't complain, do something about it. So I had worked with people on the Hill, and I had my own experiences working on the staff of one of the deputy assistant secretaries at DOE, doing budgets and having congressmen try to steal money out of my programs and things like that. So I decided, yeah, I'll go for it because I know how government works. I've been on the inside, I've been on the outside. And anyway, I'm running as a Green because I decided, not having been in politics, it'd be impossible to run with any of the two major parties. And I looked around for third parties because I needed some help from a novice. So I chose the Green Party because I liked their 10 values, the 10 key values. And the ones I like the most are grassroots democracy. We do not take money from PACs. We have very little money. We believe in listening to the people and working for the people, not special interests. Another value is social justice, something that's short shrift in today's Congress. Another is ecological wisdom. I worked in the Department of Energy, as I said before, and worked in renewable energy technologies and energy efficiency. And I believe in those technologies, and especially here in Virginia, we don't give them enough of a chance. Even with the carbon rules that EPA is issuing now, in Virginia, they are not going to help renewable energy. They're going to help natural gas and nuclear, okay? Because that is what Dominion Power is planning. There are other issues locally that can be impacted by Congress, and one of them is possible allowance of fracking in the George Washington National Forest, which is the beginnings of the water supply, not only for the Washington metropolitan area, but also Richmond. But there are a lot of other issues that motivated me to run. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you wish to comment?
Thank you. I'm running from the Libertarian Party, and I believe a lot of it has to do with my beliefs that we really need a change. We need a change in time. And it's not just that we need a change in policy and a change in the argument. We need a change in the two-party duopoly. I don't think it's helpful in all cases. I think there are some problems with it, and I think people do want choices. They want different choices out there. And I think that's why a lot of third-party candidates run. You know, the business of America used to be business. Now the business of America is government and war. I mean, obviously I'm in one, and I'm not being derogatory, but when you start to see the highest per capita incomes in an area be closer to government than industry, closer to government than entertainment, you've started to see a shift, and I think we have to look at that. But the biggest thing is, I believe in a live and let live type of society, okay, as long as you're not harming someone else. I'm a pretty conservative guy personally. There'll be a lot of things I talk about, including on the personal level drugs, that are not my thing and never have been. I'm maybe a libertarian that's never smoked marijuana. It's never been my thing. But the fact is that it's never been my thing is my choice. We can argue debates all night long, and I love that. As a lawyer, as somebody who's been an educator, I love debate and all that. But it only matters who wins and loses the debate. When the winner of the debate wants to legislate the loser and coerce them to see your view. Okay? And the reason I'm a libertarian, I think, is because even though I'm pretty conservative, I look out there and I see a lot of small government candidates. They say, well, I'm small government and pro-family values. And I believe in family values every bit, but the thing about family values you have to remember is when you're pro-family values, it means that the government's going to define who's a family and what are values. And I think that's a very dangerous, slippery slope. So I just got in the election because I've always wanted to do it. I'm excited about doing it. And I really think America needs to change. I think we need to limit government. We're going to talk about a lot of things tonight that I may say I wouldn't personally vote for because I don't see it as a federal issue. But there's no problem with the states doing it as incubators of innovation. So that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have a question for all of the candidates. What would you do as an elected official to build a sense of government accountability and restore citizens' trust in government? Mr. Galdo, by the way, we're going to rotate the order in which candidates answer the question. So Mr. Galdo, you're up first for this question.
The first way I'm showing that is I'm running as a green. As I said, we don't take PAC money. We don't take money from special interests. We believe in grassroots democracy. But beyond that, I would work for. Well, I would try to keep my campaign promises for one thing. And as I said, I am all for openness and transparency and honesty in government, and that is one of the principal reasons I'm running. I mean, we all know what money does to politics, and one of my goals is to get money out of politics as well as out of policy.
Thank you. Mr. Harrold.
Well, I think we've seen a seismic shift in the feeling that the government's watching us and we're not doing enough watching them. The first thing I would say, and I brought it up earlier, is technology, the use of technology should allow us for government to be more transparent, for our elected representatives to get more information out to us. And instead, as I said, I think we've seen technology being used more to make us transparent instead of the government. We've seen some elected officials begin to report on every vote they take, extensively report on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere about how they vote. But I believe the one thing we have to remember, and the situation in Ferguson, Missouri is indicative of this, as a former police officer. In America, the government governs with the consent of the governed. All right, a lot of governed in there. But the bottom line is that the government can only be effective if it actually has, to some degree, the consent of those that it governs. And when you don't have trust, you can't have consent because the information's not there. So what would I do? You know, I would be certainly pro in any type of legislation. I would, as I said, look for liberty, transparency, and simplicity. But on a personal level, as your congressman, I would certainly report back. I would give you the information. I would invite the criticism. I would invite you to try to change my mind if you could. But the main thing is information. In the most high-tech information society we've ever seen, I think it's becoming harder and harder to get information out of our government, and we're putting a lot more into our government. And that's what I would say. I would be transparent, and I would do everything I could to make the government more transparent. I think, as we always see, sunlight is the best antiseptic. More information people have, the better choices they can make. And I think transparency is paramount in all of our government. Thank you.
Thank you. Scholte.
I think the first priority is to keep our promises. And what I see right now is three things that deeply trouble me, and that's how our veterans are being treated. I've been meeting with folks, and we actually had a town hall meeting for veterans, and I learned that 25 to 30 veterans are committing suicide every day. When they go to try to get help, they're put off for 6 months when they're going there in a crisis situation. If they're homeless, they're told they have to be homeless for a year before they can get help. So I think that restoring faith in our government is to keep the promises that we've made to people. So it's terrible, it's a national disgrace what's happened to our veterans. But also our seniors. We see that the cuts that have been made to promises we made to our seniors citizens through the Affordable Care Act. These are people that paid into the system expecting certain benefits when they're retired, and we shouldn't be cutting those benefits. It's breaking a contract with people that have paid into this. A third thing is our federal workers. I will be a very strong advocate for keeping the promises that we've made to our federal workers. And I think that with the sequester, this was something that our congressman broke a promise, and he hurt people that live in this area through the sequester, and a lot of people lost their jobs. I would also say that I would never mock people that were hurting that came to me to testify in Congress, as Congressman Connolly has done. He mocked people that had been targeted. It's clear they were targeted by the IRS and treated it as a partisan issue when it's not. He says the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, if there's an agency of government that's overstepping its authority and targeting people because of their beliefs, I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, a Libertarian or Green Party, that is chilling. And it should have been investigated, and it's got to stop. And I just want to say that that's how you begin to have faith in government. The same thing happened with Benghazi. Benghazi was not a partisan issue. It should never have been treated as a partisan issue. We should have brought people together to find out exactly what happened rather than covering it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Ah, yes. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Clint Webb, and from the beginning of the ice core records, CO2 concentration.
Can you hold on just a minute, please, Mr. Webb?
From the beginning of the ice core records, CO2 concentrations have ranged from 175 parts per million to 300 parts per million. Is now about 400 parts per million, 25% higher than it has been for any time during the last million years. First of all, do you think this is a problem? And if so, what do you think we should do about it?
Okay, Mr. Harrold, you're up first on this one.
Well, I'm not a scientist, and what I've found when I've tried to go through and you hear statistics, the thing about statistics or numbers is if you torture them enough, they'll say anything you want to. And I'm not calling your numbers into question, I'm just saying, I think one of the problems we have is, again, the transparency, because the numbers and the statistics and the science have become partisan issues. And I don't think that's a necessity. I think we do have some absolute people that we can go to and get objective truth about what's going on. So the first thing that I would try to do in the environmental sense, I'm going to answer the question specifically, is again, I would try to have transparency and actually communicate with the American people what it is we're looking at. I see far too many. It's just, sound bites, and they just, well, no, I'm not calling you into question. I'm just saying when I try to personally as a candidate go in, someone asks me a question, I try to look at it. It's hard to get there because the science is intertwined with the policy and the politics of where somebody wants to get you. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The information, I'm not calling your science, I can't see that from here anyway. Is it a problem? Yes, there are a lot of problems, and the environment is definitely a crucial thing. I think that a lot of people are going to say libertarians just don't care about the environment. I don't think that's right. The biggest thing that I see and the biggest fear that I have is not taking care of the environment. It's not the way that we are good stewards of our resources. It's the enforcement model that we're starting to bring to the environment. I believe fully that when the Cold War was ending, the drug war ramped up. I think with Affordable Health Care Act, we're going to see the IRS as a much stronger enforcement body. I think with the EPA, and I have friends who work in enforcement capacities with the EPA, and I certainly respect them, what we're starting is the EPA is seeing a law enforcement matter for the environment. So I would certainly take seriously anything that harms our environment, but I'm more and more worried about the government coming in as the enforcer of those laws and uber regulations, picking winners and losers in future technology and energy as also a very strong problem. So, sir, I know I can't give you do I think that's a problem? I'll take your word for it because I swear I don't know the numbers. But I think there are other problems that come with EPA enforcement that can be as damaging to our liberties as to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Scholte.
Well, I know there's a lot of debate about whether global warming is happening or not. I take the approach of no regrets. I'm not sure what the right answer is on that, but I absolutely believe that in energy efficiency, in renewables, in developing alternative energies. I will say that the biggest problem we have, though, in the growth of greenhouse gases is not the United States of America. It's China, India, and other developing countries. That's where if you look at the growth in carbon emissions, they're coming from other countries that don't have the kind of environmental standards that we do, and we need to do more to address reaching out and working with those countries to bring down their pollution. There's a terrible situation in Beijing, for example, where they have days where you can't even go outside. The pollution is so bad. And there's other countries that have that similar problems, like in Mexico. So this is a problem that it's not just America. It's something that we need to look at across the world. And I do believe that we need to do, I absolutely believe in energy efficiency. I think that, as I mentioned, we should have a no regrets policy. This is good for the economy, it's good for our environment, and I think it's the best approach. But we can't ignore the fact that America is doing very well in energy efficiency. It's other countries that are contributing a lot more than we are to polluting the environment.
Thank you. Mr. Galdo.
We may be doing well in energy efficiency and renewable energy and clean energy in general, but we can do better, a lot better. Okay, our goals for renewable energy are very modest concern with compared with European countries. Spain, for example, produces 40% of its electricity from renewable energy. Okay. We have very low goals, even from the Democratic administration, of 20-25%. We can do much better, and we can do it faster. The problem is that we rely on market mechanisms. The market is not perfect. The market will turn when it has to and not before. Even with, as I said before, the carbon rules that EPA is promulgating, it doesn't necessarily mean clean energy. It may mean less carbon in the air, but it doesn't necessarily mean clean energy. Or it won't maximize the reduction in carbon emissions. We need to set goals that are aggressive, based on projections of what our problems are. It doesn't mean that we get rid of coal, that we get rid of natural gas, because until we have renewable energy to substitute for those, we cannot afford to lose the power plants that we have. What we also need to do is we need to stop shipping coal and oil to China. Okay? It's absolutely correct that Asian countries' economies are on afterburners, okay? And we have to do something either diplomatically or economically with our trade policies to force them to use cleaner energy and reduce their carbon emissions. The third thing that we need to do is prepare for the worst. NASA says that the melting of the ice masses in Antarctica are irreversible. So we have to stop encouraging people to build on the coastlines. And there are a lot of other things that we can do. And thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
If you're elected, you'll be serving in a national legislature. Could you discuss what the role of the U.S. should be in the world today, given the crises that develop nearly every week, if not more?
Well, as I said before, I believe we need to stop playing the role of the world's policeman. I think we need to stop doing that, going all over the world and basically policing it and trying to shift what we do from defense to nation building. You know, for a long time we were trying to keep the dominoes from falling. Now we're trying to set the dominoes back up. I am for a drastic reduction in military spending. Okay, I am not for a drastic reduction necessarily in defense spending. The question would be, what should our role be? I would limit the Department of Defense to only defense. I believe that's the constitutional mandate of the standing Army and the standing Navy. I believe that's basically what it's supposed to be. We've seen a shift in our military as being marketed. In other words, you've seen these commercials that the Navy is a global force for good. But I don't know that that's really true. I believe that the role of the Navy is to defend this country. Now, can we sometimes be parts of coalitions where people are going to, when there is a need for international action? There can be, and I'll say a couple of things about that. First, this is a very well-educated crowd. I doubt many people, maybe not in the military, can tell us what our objective has actually been overseas all this time. What our actual objective is in all these countries we're in. You know, I think we would always need a clear military objective. Tonight, I believe the President's going to go on, and I've read this all day, that he has the authority to act unilaterally in a non-imminent situation, and maybe we think it's imminent there, but I don't believe it's a defensive imminence. And he's going to say that he has that authority. I have a copy of the Constitution right over there. I take it with me most places I go. I don't see that in Article 2. I really don't. I think Congress has to act first. So anytime we would use the military, you would be able to trace it back to what the military is supposed to be, defense. Okay? Would I just rashly cut defense spending? No, if the spending is for defense, what I believe the role of the Department of Defense is, then no. But military spending generally, I think we need drastic cuts. I believe, personally, that focus is what we need. I believe that our defensive policy should be security through focus. We'll be able to take care of our veterans better, we'll be take care of our own soldiers better, and we'll be able to focus on defense of this country first and foremost, which I believe what our Department of Defense is for. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the other candidates like to weigh in on this question?
I think, sadly, that if America doesn't lead, those that will lead in the world don't have the best interest of the world. And I think that we have to be a strong nation, that we have to have a strong defense. I believe in peace through strength. That is a concept that has always been something that was part of our national fabric, something that Democrats and Republicans always agreed upon, that we needed to be strong. And that was the greatest guarantor of peace. I'm very concerned that we see freedom being rolled back all over the world because we have given up that role of being a leader. And it doesn't, if you're a Ukrainian or a Sudanese or a Nigerian or a Korean, you see that and you feel that every day. And I think it's important that even though I know we don't want to be the world's police, America has got to be a leader in the world for freedom and democracy and human rights and be that beacon of hope. And we all have in our history been that, and we need to continue to do that. And I'm very concerned about what's happening in the world today because we are failing to be the leaders.
Thank you. Mr. Galdo.
I agree that the U.S. should be a leader and has to be a leader, but we need to be a leader in a different way. I agree with much of what Mark said, but in addition to that, we have to focus on outcomes and not emotional responses. A lot of times, there was an article in this morning's Washington Post, and it was about someone in the state who used to be against intervention in the Middle East, and now he's for it because of some of the events that have taken place. A couple of horrific atrocities, the beheadings of Americans, and other atrocities they've been occurring. But going to war, bombing, indiscriminate bombing, or even if you're targeting your bombs, causes a lot of collateral damage, much more than what we're seeing from these atrocities in the Middle East right now. So we have to focus on outcomes. The outcome in Iraq was not very good. We went in there for the wrong reasons. We had no idea of what the outcome was going to be. Well, I did. When the Washington Post came out with the editorial supporting Bush going into Iraq, I canceled my subscription and sent an email to the editor telling them that this wasn't going to solve any problems. It was going to destabilize the Middle East, and we'd have wars between the Shiites and the Sunnis. And Iran's position in the Middle East would rise. And exactly that happened. So we have to think about the outcomes and not emotional responses. And leadership doesn't always mean military intervention. It does mean trying to control the situation through diplomatic means. And if our partners in the Middle East need help, we give it to them. But that doesn't mean putting troops on the ground and causing civilian casualties.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yes, sir.
So this is for all the candidates. Right now in Virginia, a private citizen can sell a gun to somebody else and there's no background check needed. But a business has to run a background check. Right now there is legislation in Congress that would change this and make all sales, even from private citizens, have to do a background check. So I'm wondering, would you support the legislation that would require universal background checks, yes or no?
Good question.
You're up first. Yes, I do believe in the background check.
I do as well.
Not necessarily. First of all, I think you're talking about Virginia legislation, and again, there may very well be differences. The Second Amendment, and I don't want to get too wonky, hasn't been incorporated into the Bill of Rights from the same way. I do believe that bearing arms is an individual right, and I believe that a lot of the ideas that we have, all these atrocities and these horrible things that we see, and people break all of these laws, and the natural but somewhat illogical action that I see is if we just had more laws. Most of these terrible events, and they are horrific, they break multitudes of laws. The idea that we're going to pass one more law, and that law is going to be the one that catches people who are generally homicidal and suicidal, I don't think that's realistic. As far as the idea of a background check, again, a lot of times when you go yes or no on these answers, I don't know exactly what it would do. My fear with background checks is that turns into, just as I think that Obamacare, Affordable Care Act is a step down towards a single payer system, I believe that any registration process, it's not what databases are designed to do, it's what they can do. And I believe that there's being sought after is a national registry of firearms. I don't agree with that. But again, the gun control issue is a very important issue, I know, to voters, but I believe that the courts, most courts, or a lot of courts have got it right. It is an individual right, I believe, to bear arms. And it's one of those things that a lot of people, people talk to me about this all the time. This is one of the first issues that come up when they hear I'm a libertarian. But as a former police officer and someone who's responded to scenes of dramatic and violent crime, the idea that we have all of this legislation and we're going to legislate a little bit more and it's going to solve this problem, I don't think is realistic. Also, I don't, you'll see it pigeonholed. I don't think bearing arms is about self-defense. I don't necessarily, it is about self-defense. It's not really about hunting. But there's also an element that any time one of the first steps that you ever see going down that road is to disarm the public. And I think a lot of people think that sounds like conspiratorial until you look at the last couple years and see where I think we're heading. So to disarm the citizenry. Specifically to your question, if I didn't have the specifics of the bill in front of me, I would probably say that my vote would be no.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes, and the Brady Law currently covers some people. And the problem is the Brady Law lets people buy guns at gun shows and privately and so on. And there are a lot of people that shouldn't have guns. So what we're talking about is fixing what Brady started. There is about, I guess, 40 to 60%, I'm not sure what the number is, that's covered by the Brady Law now. And there's a huge number of folks that are selling. Yes, the question is, would you fix the Brady Law?
Ms. Scholte.
I'm not sure if I'm familiar with exactly what you're talking about, but I absolutely believe in the right to keep and bear arms, and I do believe in an instant background check as long as the government doesn't record information on people that are law-abiding citizens that have firearms. What the point that Mark, I want to say that I like the point that Mark brought up. I believe that there have been a number of horrific things that have happened in our country that have been used as part of the gun debate that have nothing to do with the gun debate. I don't think we have a problem with guns. We have a mental health care crisis. There is not enough being done to help families in crisis. And if you see these horrific things that have happened, it was because these are families that were in need and people that needed help. And that is a huge issue that also needs to be addressed, is how we're caring for people how we're helping families that need help with people that are mentally ill and their families.
Thank you. Mr. Galdo?
It's true that gun control laws will not solve all of our problems, but it will help. And if we are going to have gun control laws, we shouldn't leave any loopholes in the system. And we need to be uniform across all exchanges of weapons, whether it's private, whether it's at gun shows, whether it's through dealerships. Okay, and it just makes sense that if you're going to have any kind of control on anything, that you make it uniform and don't leave any loopholes. I don't like loopholes, even in the tax system. That's why I agree with Mark on simplifying the tax code. The only difference I would make would be not to have a flat tax, but a progressive tax. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Harrold.
Well, a couple of things. And I also have not looked at the Brady bill specifically in a while. I have studied it before. Part of the problem here is the idea that we think that what exactly is the background check going to catch? If the person is disqualified from exercising their Second Amendment right, they've been disqualified for a felony conviction, they would themselves be committing a crime. And the idea that that's already there, that's in the law. I think part of the problem with a background check becomes the slippery slope. All right, and I'll give you an example. I agree with Ms. Scholte that basically what you're talking about is you're going to have a background check, but I think it's mostly a healthcare problem. So how's this background check going to trigger? Are you going to have to get a note from a psychologist? If you're depressed, can you have a gun? I mean, where are those thresholds going to be? And also when we talk about not leaving loopholes, and I agree, and I don't believe in loopholes. I think loopholes are always efforts by special interest groups to leave themselves unenforceable in a situation. But the bottom line with this is, this just isn't a situation where we're looking for a way to, it's not always results oriented. In other words, there are some problems that we endure to some degree because it's a constitutional right. If there was no right to bear arms, if it didn't exist, it wasn't in the Bill of Rights, this would be a much different debate. But the idea here is that we can pass a lot of laws and shore them all up, and we may actually make some progress on it. But we would be going against liberty. We would be going against the actual right in the Constitution. So I think this is a debate that people are so far apart on, because if you don't believe that the Second Amendment is an individual right to bear arms, then you're probably not going to get there. You don't understand why these laws wouldn't just be a simple matter of just passing them. What I would say, though, as a former law enforcement officer, the idea of background checks is a complete slippery slope. Is it going to, if it's a mental health problem, what are you going to have to do to get a clean bill of health? Do you have to get a note from a doctor, or is it only if you've been committed a crime? I've never seen a background check that would be both comprehensive enough and protect the liberty of gun owners. I don't think it would exist. I think it's a slippery slope.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, sir.
We're about an hour into the discussion tonight, and say for the one comment Suzanne made about fewer companies, I haven't heard a lot about the economy. Could each of you give 3 top priorities for the economy?
Mr. Galdo, you're up first.
3 top priorities for the economy. Okay. One would be tax reform. Well, what that's going to do is that would affect the economy by, well, through tax reform, we can generate enough additional revenue to start paying down the national debt. What that will do is that will increase, well, it will prevent inflation, for one thing. Okay. Put more money in the pockets of American workers. What we need to do is, small businesses are really the base for the economy. The number of small businesses as a proportion of all businesses has been falling for the last 20, 30 years. And that's a systemic problem. It's not just because of the recent recession. There are a lot of other issues that are systemic. The unemployment rate for college graduates, the unemployment rate for STEM workers. The current unemployment rate for STEM workers is 4.5%, which is lower than the average. Well, it's lower than the average unemployment rate, but it's 3 times higher than the unemployment rate for science, technology, and engineering and math workers before the recession. And that unemployment number has been decreasing for a number of years as well. The way we can get the economy to grow is to bring jobs back from overseas and there are a couple of ways of doing that. One is to eliminate the H-1B visa program.
Thank you. Mr. Harrold.
Okay. The first would be, as we've talked about, tax reform and simplification of taxes. And as a small business owner, I can tell you it's not just that they're confusing and it's hard to find all the deductions and you have to pay money out to your CPA. Part of the problem is that the beginning quarter of the year is stifled because anybody in here a small business owner? Okay. Most small business owners that I know, you spend March in your office. If you don't have a big-time CPA and a financial office, you spend March in your office surrounded by receipts trying to get information to your CPA, and we lose part of February and March just doing the taxes. And we have a loss of productivity because people have stopped producing, stopped sales, and stopped providing goods and services in part, especially small business owners, because they have to figure out how to pay their taxes. The next thing is immigration. We have got to reform our immigration system. I can say this as a former ICE prosecutor and policy advisor. Whatever you want the immigration system to do, whatever you think it should do, it's not doing that. No matter what you think no matter what your goals are with the immigration system, I guarantee it's not meeting them right now. A lot of times people ask me about the immigration problem. We don't have an immigration problem. There are challenges, logistical and enforcement with immigration, but immigration is an opportunity. It's an opportunity. We have to worry more about open markets than closed borders. Many countries around the world would love it if people wanted to come there. People in America are having fewer children. As we look prospectively in the future, we can get people on both ends of the spectrum. We need high-tech workers, and we need people who will take some of the jobs. I don't always believe that Americans won't take them, because there's a lot of unemployed Americans. But we need people at both ends of the spectrum. My mother was a computer science professor at Georgia Tech, and she was involved with PhD students for 15, 20 years and said we cannot be in the high-tech economy right now the way it goes without immigration. The last would be regulation. There's way too much regulation. There's no such thing as a small business owner solo. It's you and the government. I'm the only guy who works for my company, but it's still me and my co-worker, my co-partner, Uncle Sam. The other thing is no bailouts. If you're going to have a free market, you've got to deregulate it to make it free, but you can't bail it out when it fails. All of us own part of... I'll stop.
Thank you very much. And the question, can I only name 3? Can I give 4?
What Mark gave for us?
I'm sorry?
Mark gave for us.
Okay. Oh, you did? Yeah. I'm going to, I think I agree with many of the comments that Joe and Mark have made. First of all, I mentioned this before, but we have to reform the health care. We have to fix the problems that are being created by the Affordable Care Act, because we know that there's a lot of businesses that are not hiring for fear of what is going to happen with that law. So that's a huge, I guess, a rock around the neck of businesses, because they don't know what's going to happen. Number one, so we need to address that. Number 2, the burden of regulation is just outrageous. And I've been meeting and talking with folks all over the 11th Congressional District about the crushing burden of these regulations, and I think that we need regulatory reform. Right now we have a system where bureaucrats in Washington can write rules and they become law. I think we need to reverse that. I think you can write rules and they die on the vine unless Congress makes them laws. And this is a real problem because there's all these regulations pouring out of Washington that are strangling small businesses and all businesses. The third thing is cutting taxes. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. We need to cut corporate taxes. Businesses are leaving because because of the great tax burden that we have on our businesses. And I also think Joe brought up tax reform. Tax reform as well is critical. The fact that you have to hire an accountant to be able to figure out your taxes is just ridiculous. And the sad thing is it's the middle class that are the ones that are suffering. Because the wealthy folks can hire an accountant and find all the loopholes. It's the folks in the middle that are getting crushed. And that goes for businesses as well. Small businesses are getting crushed. And that's what I'm hearing when I'm going out talking to the folks. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yes, you first.
Thank you very much. We know that there have been some studies that have observed men are still being paid more than women in similar positions with similar levels of education. In 2009, the Lilly Ledbetter Act was passed. The Democrats supported it. But the Chamber of Commerce and several business groups opposed it because they were afraid that there was going to be frivolous lawsuits. I'm curious to learn if you all think that Congress needs to re-examine this, and if you would support such, and if you would have supported the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Payments Act.
Right. Mr. Galdo, you're up first for this one.
I believe in equal pay for equal work. And sometimes, even if we have legislation that requires that, it might be difficult in the workplace to enforce it, because employers can give all kinds of reasons why this employee is not the same as that employee. Nevertheless, we have a lot of issues with large corporations not wanting to pay fair wages and provide fair working conditions for employees, whether they are women or men. I alluded to the H-1B visa program before. What that does is that's not a migrant worker program for, agricultural industry. It's a migrant worker program for college-educated professionals, mostly in the computer engineering, programming, computer sciences, and engineering fields. The professional engineering societies have been fighting the HB1 program for a decade. Okay? Congressman Connolly supports that program. He wants to expand it along with others in Congress. What that does is that's taking away jobs from Americans and from permanent residents who have green cards. As I said before, the unemployment rates for college graduates has been dropping, and the unemployment rate for STEM workers has been dropping. I'll give you an example. There are 600,000 of these foreign workers in professional fields in the United States today, taking away 600,000 jobs. Apple, on its website, boasts that it created 10,000 jobs in the last 12 years. That's 3,333 jobs a year. It has 5,000 of these HB1 visa workers. That's half of the jobs they created. Okay? And the other Silicon Valley and high-tech companies are doing the same.
Okay, Mr. Harrold.
I don't want to talk too much on H-1B as an immigration attorney. I don't deal with it that much. I don't favor the way it's written right now, but I do believe there are more safeguards than that as far as advertising to go a little bit and to make sure there is no American. As far as equal pay for equal work, another one of those issues. I did a show one time, I think an hour long on this, on a television show. And every time somebody had new statistics, one said it's just an absolute disparity, and some said it's over the course for different reasons. Women more often leave the workforce and come back. And there's other factors that over the course of their career, they make less money. That being said, the truth is I don't know. I've seen statistics that say everything about it. I would favor in any case, and this goes from employment to marriage to anything else, I think that any gender bias is unfair. I would support any time that we have an absolute way that we see that two people get hired and and this used to be, I understand completely of course, but I've had trouble finding those specific times where this person and this person have exactly the same job, the same experience, everything else. The other problem with it, anytime you try to force parity on, and I believe in the equality of it, but when you try to force parity, no matter what the parity is, whatever group's trying to be protected, part of the problem becomes that it dilutes the individual business's opportunity to have merit. Because what can happen, of course, is that let's say these two people have to get paid the same. Okay, but what if he's really good and she's really bad? What if she's really good and he's really bad? You get into actually legislating the way that the companies run. And I think that any time you have a classification that you try to legislate for private company and private business across the board, you can get into a lot of problems with that. But the goal, if it could be achieved legislatively in a way that was actually fair and achieved its purpose, I would definitely support anything that was basically a fairness doctrine. That's a different context, I know. But the bottom line here is I think you have to be very careful when you referee the way that companies pay Because if you force it as a step-by-step that these two people have to get paid the same thing over time, it dilutes that business's ability to rate those folks to their goals. That'd be my answer. Thank you.
Ms. Scholte.
Yeah, I believe in equal pay for equal work, and I don't know, honestly, I don't know a lot. I remember this bill, and I don't know the pros and cons about it, but it's certainly something I would be willing to take a look at. In essence, I know that I've heard conflicting things about how bad that is, about how women are treated, and I think that I know that that there has been a growing coming together of those income inequalities as more women have been in the workforce. And if it's still a persistent problem, I'd be glad to talk to you afterwards, but I don't know a lot about the issue. But I would obviously support equal pay for equal work. And if people are being discriminated against because of their sex, it's not fair.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know how you would help Americans save so they can secure their future and live independently of age. There are a lot of layers to that question. Older workers have been laid off. There are statistics in the paper and can't find good jobs anymore because of their age. There's statistics in the paper all the time and on the news about the percentage of the population that have very, very limited savings, that are facing, retirement and growing older. And there's all this talk about, can Social Security survive? So, boom, 3 strikes. What's an older person supposed to do to even live a life with dignity of any kind?
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I did bring up the point. I think that we need to restore the money that was cut for our seniors. That would be a priority for me. But I think that this gets back to the whole question of everyone's being strangled. It's not just seniors. I mean, young people can't find work either. And this is because of the economic situation that we find ourselves. And the solution to it is all the things that we've all been talking about, that we all agree on: tax reform, cutting taxes, cutting regulations. I think the Affordable Care Act is causing a lot of difficulties, making people really reluctant to hire because they don't know what the full impact of that's going to be. So I think it's a whole range of things that we need to do. And I do think that one of the fixes that we need to do right away with the Affordable Care Act is we need to give incentives, tax incentives to individuals to be able to purchase their own insurance. Right now, companies get a big tax break if they provide insurance to their employees. But if you're an individual that needs insurance, you don't get such a tax break. The employees do. So we need to create a system where folks who are uninsured can get a tax break in order to purchase their own insurance. And I think that's another fix that needs to happen to the Affordable Care Act. But again, seniors, young people, everyone's being hurt by this economy, and it's because there's too many regulations, taxes are too high, and we're not doing enough to introduce reforms that will help folks.
Mr. Galdo.
There are many things we can do to help people retire in a more comfortable position. One of them is to stop promoting consumerism and credit. The way to build up a nest egg is to save. And today we have a consumer-oriented society, and the government helps Madison Avenue in promoting that by all the loan programs that they have and fostering other ways of spending money to try to boost the economy. Okay. It's not the way to boost the economy. The way to boost the economy is get more money into people's pockets. Okay. Another way is, well, talking about Social Security. Social Security benefits have been cut several times in ways that people don't normally think. The way we compute the consumer price index or inflation has been modified a number of times during the Reagan and notably during the Reagan and the Clinton administrations specifically to reduce Social Security benefits. Okay? If you find yourself falling behind inflation, it's not your imagination. That's the way it's been planned. Okay? The other thing is for the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates, okay, and stop allowing negative interest rates on savings. every year, anybody that saves in the bank or in CDs loses money. They're trying to force people to put money into the stock market, which is nothing more than a casino. Okay? I can go on. There are a number of other problems with government policies that actually make people poorer. And we have to change those policies. We have to, instead of putting money into the pockets of corporations and the wealthy elite, start putting money back into the pockets of the average American.
Thank you. Mr. Harrold.
Well, I think the question was basically, as a legislator, what I would do to promote savings. You know, the one thing about it is I would, again, back to simplicity. I think one of the major problems we have is there is information out there that seniors especially, who either have so much more trouble doing not their taxes because they keep moving the goalposts. And I think as you get older, uncertainty is the real problem. That's back to simplification, back to transparency, everything we've talked about. And I agree pretty much with everything that's been said there. We have to have less regulation. We have to have, but what we really need is certainty. Okay? I believe that we should cut capital gains tax. It is a casino. I mean, there's a risk element, but if it is a casino, I think the people that help to capitalize business should be rewarded for their risk and not basically double taxed on their money if it's post-tax money, which a lot of it is. The problem I see, what I would do is I would keep promises, first of all. I'm all for both reforming military spending and entitlements, but that doesn't mean going back on promises. That's part of the trust in government. If a promise has been made, if people have paid into the rules, those rules should exist. We do need to reform it, entitlements generally. I do think that it's going to go, I don't think that it can sustain, if the numbers I'm looking at are correctly. We would also, the sustainability and the predictability is wrapped up in our debt. Okay, I'll ask this. If we used to talk about billions of debt, now we talk about trillions of debt, $17 trillion of debt. How many in here know what's above $1 trillion? I think it's a gazillion, but I had to look it up and I'm not even sure I'm right. Like I said, a very educated group and we don't know exactly what it is. Debt is really sucking away the certainty, but the main thing I would say, and this is a tough answer, is I would stop moving the goalposts. When people invest their money, when people choose to put their money here versus there, a savings account versus a CD, stop changing the rules in the middle and moving those goalposts, because when you do that, you do stifle whatever you choose to do, whether it's the stock market, savings, CD. When you change the tax implications with complex tax afterwards, and people don't get their expected return, the uncertainty gets much more important to you as you get closer to retirement. Thank you.
Thank you. You had your hand up first, so I'll take you first.
Yes, I'm Lynn Garvey Hodge from Clifton, Virginia. I want to touch on a topic that you all have just lightly touched on this evening, and that is the whole topic of mental health issues and addictions and alcohol and drug addictions in this country. Just this weekend, I lost a very dear friend. Many of you in this room probably know who I'm talking about. Greg Hembry, Director of Planning and Zoning for the City of Vienna, somebody who no one would have guessed. I want to hear from each of you. What are some of your deep dive agendas for addressing this very difficult issue that we talk about but really seem not to do anything about?
Mr. Galdo, you're up first on this one.
Well, this is a serious health issue. We certainly need more support for individuals that have both mental problems and alcohol problems and drug problems. I agree with Mark that we need to abandon the drug war and treat it as a health issue. Separate the criminal problem from the health problem so that we can deal with the health problem better. There are some drugs that are being developed to help alcohol addiction as well as drug addiction. Perhaps one avenue is to put more money into that kind of research. The other is to just pour more money into social services to help not only those with mental issues, but also people with disabilities as well.
Thank you, Mr. Harrold.
this is one of those issues that I would say it's one of those issues. Is an important issue? Yes. Is it a crucial issue? Yes. Is the federal issue? I'm not really sure that it is. Okay. It's one of those things that is very serious. Now, I will say this. I don't believe that this is a federal issue per se. The idea that we're going to pour money here and pour money there, I think we have to advocate for, there's very little doubt that this should be something that people need to deal with. Anytime I go and talk about the fact that I don't think government should be involved in everything, it's not that there aren't problems out there, but there are certain things that I don't think the government does well, and I think healthcare is one of them. I also fear that anytime you get the government directly involved in funding, whether it's education or mental health, the government has to define it at some point, and they have to find a way to define what is mental health and what's not mental health. On this issue, as a human being, as someone who is deeply concerned about this, I would say, a lot of people say libertarians, you can't live on an island, and I agree with that. I totally agree with that. But what binds us together is not government. Should there be programs? Of course there should. Should states have programs? Of course they should. Now, the one exception to this, I don't think that we want an added massive government bureaucracy to go at healthcare as to go and start more and more of the Obamacare model. I don't think the government does this well, and taking over 1/7 of the economy, I think, becomes a liberty tax by forcing you to buy things or do this sort of thing. Now, the exception to that would be our veterans, because there's a difference there. The federal government being deeply involved in funding and pouring money into these programs and that program indiscriminately throughout the country, I don't think is a good fix. But if the mental health problems stem from service in the government, if they stem from the military, if it's PTSD, then I do believe the government has a very strong role there for those people. But I guess the original question, what would I do? I don't believe that healthcare is something the government does well. And as a federal legislator, not as a human being who is concerned about it, in that role as a federal legislature, I don't think that it would be something that I believe the federal government should be deeply involved in.
Scholte. I have personally dealt with this issue. Several years ago, my son was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and it's been a 4 and 5 year nightmare. The problems I see are at least four. Number one, people that are in crisis, we need the ability for families to have better folks to reach out, crisis intervention. I was really impressed with some of the ability to reach out to people in Fairfax County, but that's not the same in a lot of other areas. And I think that we need to do more to destigmatize mental health. One of the biggest problems I had with my son was trying to convince him that taking medication for something that's wrong with his brain is no different than medication for somebody taking it for their heart. And I think that we need to destigmatize that, because I think there are people that are suffering from depression. I don't know the circumstances behind the gentleman you're talking about, but I think about Robin Williams. I mean, there are things that are happening where we're not seeing the signs, and I think part of that is people hide that because it is stigmatized, the mental health, and it is no different. To me, the brain is the final frontier. And the fact that we can walk in and get a knee replacement or have heart surgery and be running around and healthy shortly thereafter, the amazing things we've been able to accomplish in mental health, but we're nowhere near that when it comes to the brain. And I think of all the things that we're facing: autism, Alzheimer's, bipolar, schizophrenia, all these things are brain. And if we could, I think that is one thing the government can and should do, is get more involved in research on the brain, because it is a great investment in making and helping people. And then the final thing is we need longer term care for people who are facing mental disease. You can't figure out a problem in 3 days or 30 days. We need longer term help to be able to get to the heart of what's troubling them. Thanks.
Thank you. Ma'am, you had your hand up.
Thank you very much for hosting this very special event. My name is Jean Nguyen with Voice of Vietnamese Americans. I'm also with the coalition of APA in Virginia. And I congratulate all of you, and I wish all of you would be there in the House of Representatives to represent us. So I think that when you're there, the very special position you have is to represent our Constitution, to defend our people on national interest. And based on that, I would ask two questions. What would you be able to compromise to get a balanced budget so that we don't have federal shutdown during your term, because that creates a lot of problems for the whole nation. It affects our national interest. The second question has to do with all the questions raised, which is the revenues, the jobs, the sustainability of our economy, the guarantee of our young graduates, and the guarantee of our seniors, especially the care for our veterans. That has to do with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I wonder if you pay attention to that, because at the House, you're the federal level, and you will have to work with international community. And 90% of our revenue and the market is out there beyond the border of the U.S. So I wonder if you would support the Trans-Pacific Partnership so that we open more markets, bring back jobs to us, create more manufacturing jobs for our high technology skills, and bring back higher jobs, better paid jobs for us in the manufacturing sections. And also, I would like to see if you pay more attention to the R&D, which is research and development, and also protect our IPR. The key of this TPP is to make sure that our law, the level playing field, is being established internationally, and that is where we maintain our leadership. The U.S. key value is freedom and law, level playing field. We equal under the law. That's very important.
Mr. Harrold, you're up first for this one.
Okay. I think there are a lot of parts to that. You know, something I want to say generally about my comments tonight. I don't believe that government's always the enemy. I just don't think it's always the answer. I think there are proper roles of government, and they're found in federal government. They're found in the Constitution. Now, speaking a little bit to, I think you asked about people coming out of college. Is that right?
About the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Okay, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Okay. When we're trading with countries, we're rarely fighting them as much. I'm for any type of partnership that promotes free trade between countries. We don't have, here's the thing, everybody says, okay, you know, we have the free market. It's not really a free market, it's corporatism. But then when it fails because of the problems with corporatism, not with an actual free market, they say, see, the free market doesn't work. We need to take away governmental trade barriers and let the free market operate on its own. It doesn't mean that corporations are great. It doesn't mean that every part of the market, there's no hiccups to it. But the constant cycle we have of bailing out our own market, not letting certain things fail, not letting it evolve, is self-defeating. Specifically there, I'm for trade everywhere. I'm for trade everywhere, but I'm not for the government refereeing that trade, because in the long term, the government starts to pick winners and losers. So the answer to your question is, I'm for any program that promotes the free trade, nationally, but not the government intervention where the government's running the trade, if that makes sense. I think our trade policies is now just what they say, the policies, and instead of letting us have free trade with other countries, we now have policies that have been implemented, and they're run like everything becomes a government operation. So yes, anything that's for free trade I'm for, but it's imposed governmental winners and losers and programs, I'm not for that.
Thank you. Ms. Scholte.
I think the first question was about the balanced budget. I support a balanced budget amendment, and I do think that we have to look at entitlement reforms, and that's something that is very controversial. But I think that we need to look at how we're going to reform the entitlement programs in order to be able to achieve a balanced budget. For example, for people that are entering the workforce, having the retirement age increase, for example, not for people that are already in the workforce, but for people that will be entering the workforce. But I support a balanced budget amendment. And then you were talking about Trans-Pacific partnerships. Yeah, I'm totally in favor of that. I agree with Mark. I will say one thing though. I do. I am concerned, and I do believe in free trade. However, I do believe that you cannot expect an American worker to be able to compete with a worker in China. And I think that we should establish, this is something I'm looking forward to doing with my Democrats who've endorsed me. By the way, I know I'm Republican, but I've been endorsed by Democrats that I've worked with on human rights issues for years.
And one of the things that we've been dreaming about is establishing with labor unions and with human rights groups and with the Chamber of Commerce what we would call a labeling system. Okay, well, it would be basically you would have, we would call it democracy, freedom, and labor labeling. Like you had the good housekeeping seal of approval on products, so that when an American consumer goes in to buy something, it would have a DFL label, and the consumer would know this was a product that was made in a country where the workers had the right to strike, where they had the right to vote, where they had basic human rights. And then the consumer can make the decision whether they want to pay. And I think that we need to do that. We need to inform the consumers. And I know that when I was growing up, you had products that had 100% guarantee. We don't have that anymore. Why is that? Because they're not being made in American companies. They're being made overseas. And that's why you have the extended service programs, because they can't stand up by their products because they're not made here. Thank you. Mr. Harrold.
I'm all for free trade agreements as long as we have good partners. In instances where the balance of trade is skewed enormously, as it has been for China, over the last decades, several decades, there needs to be some intervention. And going to the WTO doesn't solve the problem. Okay? We have a lot of really good trading partners where the balance of trade may be negative, but not by much, or it may be positive. Korea is one of those. But we have to be willing, okay, to make adjustments when it's hurting our economy. An imbalance in trade, a huge trade deficit, lowers the GDP, takes jobs away from Americans. And I don't think anyone has the will, when a trade agreement goes awry like that, to fix it. So, in this instance, I mean, I don't see a problem, okay? Yeah. But, yes. But I'm making a general statement about our global trade policy. We need some reform in that area. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. And for balancing the budget, yeah,
I don't think you answer. If we would compromise so that we pass the budget in time, and we won't have a fellowship. That was more important. If we would compromise.
I thought we had a process here, and all of us have been trying to follow it.
I am opposed to legislation that forces us to balance the budget, because there are times when we need a budget deficit, but this isn't the time. We need to start paying down the debt. We not only need to balance the budget, but we need to produce a surplus. And with the current budget deficit, I believe that some tax reform will be able to achieve that.
Okay, we have one more question, and I'll take this one from the index card. It says, you mentioned all these regulations. Would you name several specific regulations that hinder small businesses? Ms. Scholte, you're up first this time.
I would say well, one of the ones I'm most familiar with are some of the things that are going on with the Affordable Care Act, and how there are all of these forms and information that doctors have to fill out now, and when they're seeing patients, and this is lowering the amount of time they're able to give care to patients. There's so many rules and regulations that are associated with this act, and this is one of the things I'm hearing about a lot, is the care that they're from doctors able to give patients because of all these regulations. Another thing as well is the regulations have come out from Environmental Protection Agency, the things that are affecting basically every part of our life from the moment that you get up in the morning. It's like every single aspect of our lives is being regulated by bureaucrats. The amount of water that's in your toilet, or your light bulb, the kind of light bulb that you could own. And those are just everyday life that we're all being affected by these regulations.
Mr. Galdo.
I don't have any examples of specific regulations, but in general, the problem is, for the most part, that small businesses are subject to the same regulations that large corporations are, okay? And many times those regulations were initiated specifically because of large corporations. We need to be able to differentiate between the two. There are examples that I don't want to tip my tongue now that apply to small farmers as well as to other small businesses, small restaurants, etc. I think that's really the issue, is differentiating small businesses from large corporations.
Mr. Harrold.
Well, as a small business owner, it doesn't affect me directly. I don't have employees. But I think I am hearing a lot when I talk to people about the Affordable Care Act. There are a lot of regulations that, albeit it is new, but it does make it hard to know when, what you're really getting into as far as, it all comes down to, in my opinion, simplification and uncertainty. Business cannot operate with uncertainty. And when the goalposts get changed, whether it's the Affordable Care Act, EPA regulations are one. FDA regulations have gotten very confusing in the drug market. That doesn't mean we don't want safe pharmaceuticals, but it's a very confusing process. I've talked to people that said, it's very hard to regulate science that way because you're talking about regulation. Remember, part of the problem with regulation, in I guess more esoteric sense, is regulation isn't passed by your legislators. It's regulatory. It's basically the laws get passed and then the regulations get written in a much more dense way, and they put into these things called CFR, if you've ever seen a Code of Federal Regulations. So what happens is the legislators voting, the Congress, whoever's elected to Congress, I like the idea that we could all get elected, but whoever's elected to Congress, you vote on the law, but what actually impacts the small business owner are those regulations, and they're very dense. I'm an immigration lawyer, and the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, is much longer than the law, and you have to parse it out. But I'd say the biggest thing is taxes. The biggest thing, like I mentioned before, is a small business owner is taxes. You spend so much time figuring out not only how to do your taxes, but what deductions are there. You spend so much time investigating ways to parse how much money you pay in, how much you get back, when you pay it. It's very hard. So I think the biggest problem in a regulation we have for small business is the tax code. And I agree, it's much more advantageous for large companies. As a small business owner, I spend a staggering amount of time doing taxes in a way that's beneficial to me so that it doesn't totally undercut my efforts to make a profit for myself. And the biggest obstacle I have sometimes isn't dense immigration law that I practice professionally, it's figuring out that tax code to move forward and figure out how to build my business. Thanks.
Thank you. We have time for just one more question. Yes, sir.
Bob Meredith here in Fairfax. I have a question regarding federal funding of elections. How do you feel about that? And I guess another kind of a question, how much money did your party spend in the last election in Congress?
Okay, Mr. Galdo.
How much money did I spend in the last election for Congress? I was the only candidate in Virginia for my party. So I don't know how much the party spent in general, but I'll tell you it was a lot less than either of the major parties. We had federal matching funds, so we towed the line in terms of the limitations that are imposed upon by the matching fund regulations. So, personally, my campaign, I don't remember, but I would guess I spent somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. Okay. Mostly of my own money. So, and it showed in the election results because because the media did not cover the election at all. This is not a district race that is of interest to the news media because it's considered a safe race for the Democrat. And that's one of the problems, that voters really don't have a choice because they don't know enough about the candidates. If you multiply the size of this audience by even 100, it's still a small fraction of the 400,000 voters in this district. So yes, I'm in favor of federal funding.
Thank you. Mr. Harrold.
I forgot to mention, it wasn't in the small business context, as someone running my own campaign, I'd also put the regulations of the Federal Election Commission in there, trying to figure out how you go about, playing by all the rules. As far as federal money in elections, the idea of matching funds is very often advantageous for smaller parties, third parties, that sort of thing. I do think that even if there are some funding for an even level playing field, I think the one area we have to get away from is any funding for the conventions themselves. I don't believe, Libertarian Party's convention is much smaller, as you can imagine, and we self-fund it, whereas the major parties get. There's a lot of advantages to ballot access, to the debates, to the order that our names appear on the ballot. These things are advantageous for the major parties. So specifically about matching funds, I'd say that in some limited areas, if it does give you some parity, it can be appropriate. But the idea would be that the matching funds really, when you get into matching, it's not going to create parity. It's going to, in many cases, match a much bigger amount versus, and so you get into that. How much money is, I don't know if anybody asked this, but Joe said, I don't know what our party spent, the Libertarian Party spent on congressional races last year. I too would say that it's less. I didn't run last time. This is my first time running for elected office. I can say that my personal campaign, I actually thought I was probably going to be under the $5,000 limit the whole time, where I didn't have to fill out all of the FEC stuff, because you really become a candidate at $5,000. But in a benevolent way, somebody brought me right over the $5,000 mark. So if no one ever gives me any more money, I would have been better off to return that $12. It didn't come in 12, but it went 12 over. I think I have a couple of seconds left. I think this is the last question. Thank you for allowing me to be here, for inviting me here tonight. And this is what it's all about. We can disagree, but as long as it's peaceful, this is what's great about our country. Even look at Bush v. Gore. A lot of people criticized it, but not a shot was fired. As an immigration attorney that does asylum cases, there are more and more people persecuted for elections gone wrong in small countries, and we do it peacefully here, and that's the most important thing. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Ms. Scholte.
I don't know what was spent in the last election 2 years ago. That's what your question was. I think the candidate that ran raised about 200,000. He's asking about the party, Chris Perkins. Chris Perkins? Yeah. 248,000. And I don't believe in matching funds. I think we do need some reforms. I think that I would rather see full disclosure for people that are contributing, but I think we should lower the amount to restricting people to only contribute $2,600, and I think that really favors the incumbents. It's really hard for challengers like us, and we're running a real shoestring campaign, but I really appreciate the League of Women Voters and what the AARP and the Asia Pacific Coalition is doing in having a program like this, because you're creating a level playing field for us to be able to get our message out. And if you guys continue to do things like that, I think it's really good for democracy. I do think that that there do need to be reforms, though, in our election laws. I was talking to a guy from Canada, and they have like strict limits on how much they can spend, and also strict limits on how long they can campaign for. And it's like a breeze. I was shocked. I don't know if I agree with that, but I do think that we do need to make some reforms. But I also think that the more that people hear about candidates, and the more that we get an opportunity to be on television, to have a debates like this, it's really good for democracy. And I want to comment on something that Marc said. I was talking to a woman that came here from Eritrea, and she was talking about how her son in college and his roommate one had supported Obama, and one had supported Romney, and how after the election they just shook hands and said, great, no problem, but how in her country they would have led to bloodshed, and how great it is to be an American, that we can go through this process and respect each other. And I want to thank you all for doing this and hosting us tonight. Thank you.
And I would like, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, the AARP, and the Coalition of Asian Pacific Americans of Virginia, and Mason District Council and Providence District Council, I want to thank all of you for attending this event.